Hi, everyone. I'm Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch. David, last week we talked about Sierra Leone's winning comeback in Louisiana. This week we have two winning comebacks to talk about, one in Arkansas, the other in Saudi Arabia, that produced the most significant changes to Derby Watch list.
Yeah, last week, Sierra Leone sort of jumped out ahead of the field, at least for the time being, but we kind of anticipated there were going to be some future changes on the list with a bunch of prep races both last week and upcoming this week. And I think we got some answers about how some of the best 2-year-olds from last season were going to come back this year, with Timberlake passing that first test of his 3-year-old season in the Rebel, and also Forever Young, who I know has been on some people's radars based on his impressive performances in Japan last year. We learned a little bit more about him on Saturday in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, a couple of good comebackers, and they both got to the wire first. David and I have a little different take on Forever Young's comeback, but I think that we both agree that Timberlake he did exactly what we had hoped to see in the Rebel Stakes. But let's take a look at the Derby Watch list real quick before we start talking about those individual performances. And David, the biggest changes to the list, Timberlake, you dropped him from 12 to 1 to 10 to 1, which is not a huge shift in odds, but I think it's kind of symbolic. He's now the solitary second choice behind Sierra Leone.
Yeah, you never really know if some of the 2-year-olds who were among the top of their division last year are going to come back as the same horses as their sophomore season. And I think we got that answer with Timberlake. He ran his typical speed figure in the Rebel. I didn't drop his odds too much because he didn't beat a field of the same quality that Sierra Leone did in the Risen Star a couple weeks ago. So Timberlake is the second choice this week, but I think we can expect further movement in coming weeks with a few of the horses below him going to be in action at least next weekend.
Yeah, action's starting to pick up. Forever Young, you dropped his price from 25 to 1 to 15 to 1 off his win in Saudi Arabia. Explain the odds drop on Forever Young.
Well, I don't think that any of the horses above him on the list have run particularly fast, at least so far this year. So I do think it's a year that is open to a new face, and Forever Young has definitely attracted some buzz. And at least in my opinion, I think we saw him take a positive step in the right direction on Saturday, but I know we'll discuss that in more depth later in this video.
Yeah, well, he's now 4 for 4. That's a pretty good record to argue against. A couple of new faces to the list: Common Defense, runner-up in the Rebel, and Just a Touch, who runs this weekend, we expect, in the Gotham Stakes. They both open up at 30 to 1, and in order to make room for those two, we had to drop a couple, those being Just Steel, who finished 7th with the wide trip in the Rebel, and Uncle Heavy, who did nothing wrong. He got stuck on a farm outside Parks after a quarantine situation, and he can easily jump back onto the list. He won the Withers. He's headed toward the Wood Memorial, and we'll find out more about Uncle Heavy down the road. And then the other significant, I guess it's relatively significant, you dropped Speakeasy from 40 to 1 to 30 to 1, and we'll find out on either Friday or Saturday how accurate that odds change was, correct?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that Todd Pletcher saw fit to enter him in the Fountain of Youth. We'll see if he ultimately runs there, because I know he's cross-entered in an allowance race. But it seems like they are thinking about this horse as a Derby type at this point, trying to get him onto the trail. He definitely ran a speed figure that suggests he could be competitive with the horses above him, but we'll see if he can take that next step forward.
Well, we'll talk about Speakeasy in the preview segment after the recap segment. Let's first talk about the most significant Derby prep last week. And David, this is a race that we've been looking forward to, because a very good horse made his 3-year-old debut in this race. And Timberlake, I think he did what, again, we hoped to see.
Yeah, it just feels like the perfect prep race, this Rebel Stakes, because he took a mental step forward. Because in a few races last year, we saw him getting really rank, not settling early in his races, especially apparent in the Breeders' Cup, where he didn't really finish the race off after pulling on Florent Geroux early in the race. And I think the most encouraging thing about the Rebel was that he actually relaxed into that clubhouse turn, seemed fine sitting behind horses. And then in the stretch, they tipped him out 4 wide. He did what he was supposed to do, putting away an overmatched field. And we'll see if he can take that next speed figure step forward in his second start. But coming back as fast as he was as a 2-year-old, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Let's take a look at the stretch run of the Rebel Stakes, and that's Timberlake. He'll be on the far outside. He seemed a little bit green in deep stretch, David. He kind of drifted out a little bit. He came back in. I don't know if he kind of lost focus after he hit the front. I don't think that's a big deal, but he was a little bit green. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, he did not change leads on cue at the top of the stretch. And once Christian Torres sort of forced him to change leads at about the 3/16th pole, he kind of got to wandering outside a little bit on his right lead. But once he got him straightened out from about the 8th pole home, I really liked the way he leveled off and finished this race and ran through the wire. I know some people have some doubts about how far this horse wants to go, being a son of Into Mischief. But if you look at the dam side pedigree for Timberlake, it is all European stamina breeding. His dam actually won going 1.75 miles on the turf in Europe, and she's a half sister to a group winner going 1.5 miles. So there is a lot of stamina in this pedigree for him to go longer. And I think he ran this day like a horse that you don't have to be too worried about some added ground.
Yeah, and with 66 qualifying points already in the bank, he is virtually guaranteed a spot in the Kentucky Derby, assuming he runs well next time out and comes out of the race in good shape. A new face to the list is the Rebel runner-up, Common Defense. And boy, you talk about an all-time great trip orchestrated by jockey Brian Hernandez. Common Defense never left the rail. He saved ground start to finish in a big field. And then he actually galloped out fairly well after the wire and was in front of Timberlake on the gallop out. He ran pretty well, Common Defense.
Yeah, Brian Hernandez Jr. has sort of been the star of these Oaklawn preps so far from a jockey standpoint. I mean, he tried to give the exact same ride that he gave to Mystic Dan in the Southwest. Obviously, not as successful here with Common Defense. Maybe he's not quite as talented as that horse. But this horse did take a nice step forward off his Southwest performance, where it just looked like he was a little keen early and didn't quite finish off that race. Even though he got this perfect trip, this was an encouraging performance for him to finish 3 lengths ahead of everybody else in this field, stepping all the way up to a 90 buyer. And he's got those 27 qualifying points, which I think we have to start paying attention to, because Ken McPeak tends to run his horses through the prep series, and little by little they start to accumulate the points. And we saw it with Sun Thunder last year. Didn't win any of the preps, but through finishing 2nd, 4th, and 5th was able to get his way into the Derby.
Yeah, for sure. Timberlake earned a 93 buyer speed figure that matched his 2-year-old career high, and Common Defense, he took a big step forward last time out with his new top, which is a 90. So a couple of good 3-year-olds to keep an eye on moving forward. And there's a look at their past performances. Interestingly, Timberlake, for a horse that was making his first start as a 3-year-old, boy, he gained an awful lot of seasoning last year as a 2-year-old. In fact, Timberlake is one of only 3 horses on the Derby Watch list that have started 6 times. And there he is. He's ranked number 2. So this is a horse with a good foundation of races underneath him. And hopefully he can, stay sound and move forward into the Kentucky Derby. So Timberlake and Common Defense 1-2 in the Rebel. The other major Derby prep last week was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where Forever Young, he was kind of hyped as the second coming of Derma Sotogake, and he was 3 for 3 going in. David, he remained unbeaten coming out, Forever Young, winning the Saudi Derby.
Well, he went a couple places better than Derma Sotogake did in this race last year, when that one finished 3rd against what I would consider to be maybe a lesser field than what Forever Young beat on Saturday, because the horse that he runs down at the wire, Bookham Dano, he's not on our Derby Watch list. That's because his connections have smartly resisted getting Derby fever with Bookham Dano. He is a very good 1-turn, 7 furlong to a mile type horse, but he can run pretty fast. And Forever Young, probably not a natural 1-turn miler, was still able to run him down despite hanging on his left lead throughout the entire stretch run.
Wrong lead all the way through the wire, but he got up to nail Bookham Dano right on the money. And, he's 4 for 4 now. Let's take a look at his past performances really quick. Forever Young and the horse that he beat, because he defeated a pretty good one. Bookham Dano was a very good 1-turn horse from Florida. He ran super. They both ran fast. 136 and change set a track record in Saudi Arabia. So Forever Young, he ran well. Here's why I'm not going to go, goo-goo over Forever Young's staying undefeated. He broke slowly. Okay. He was hard-ridden. Bookham Dano and the 3rd place finisher, Ben Tornado, kind of left Forever Young at the head of the lane. Forever Young raced on his wrong lead to the wire. And yeah, the time was fast. I'm not going to be overcritical for a reason that I'll explain in just a minute. But I think that you have a different take, David. I wanted to see more and I didn't see it. What's your opinion of Forever Young?
Yeah, obviously he came in with a big reputation, and I know he was sort of a ridiculous short price in the world betting pool. I think it went off at odds on. Some of those prices in the world pool were a little ridiculous, including White Abario in the Saudi Cup, but that's a different topic. I feel like based on the margin of victory, some people might be disappointed that such a short price had to work so hard, but I think that price was largely due to the hype around him, and he is a horse that had achieved a higher level than Derma Sotogake, the obvious comparison had when they were 2-year-olds in Japan, respectively. And Forever Young came back and beat a really good miler. And like you said, did it in fast time. I don't think you're going to see any speed figure makers go on the record giving this race a number because no one in the US is really focusing on studying the races at King Abdulaziz Racecourse. And we can only really compare it to some prior editions of the Saudi Cup and Saudi Cup and Saudi Derby cards. And there have only been 4 prior ones. But if you do look at the prior times that the Saudi Derby has gone in compared to the Saudi Cup, this year's Saudi Cup went an average of about 0.8 seconds faster than prior editions. This Saudi Derby went over 2 seconds faster than the average prior time for all 4 of the Saudi Derbies run from 2020 to 2023. So this was a historically fast race if you can compare it to prior years. And it just feels like this is a horse that won this race on pure class and based on pedigree and his physicality. You've got to imagine that more ground is going to suit him and he's going to get it next time in the UAE Derby.
Yeah, well, his connections have said all along that the Saudi Derby was a prep for the UAE Derby, and they expect him to improve at the longer distance. And one of the reasons I mentioned Derma Sotogake earlier, we both did. Derma Sotogake, let's look at his past performances last year after his 2 starts in the Middle East. You look at his 3rd place finish in the Saudi Derby, and you kind of go, well, so what? Well, so what is that he improved a mile next time out and he crushed the UAE Derby. So with regards to Forever Young, he got the money. The Saudi Derby was always a prep for the UAE Derby. And we're going to find out on March 30th if Forever Young can make a similar forward move. That's one reason why I'm not going to be overly critical of Forever Young, expecting him to improve at the longer distance, probably a little softer tempo of the race around 2 turns. At any rate, that's a look at the Rebel and also the Saudi Derby. Before we wrap things up, just a couple quick takeaways from me. Timberlake, we mentioned this earlier, he already matched his career high speed figure as a 2-year-old, and he did it in his comeback race. I think that's a very positive sign and an indication that he should be able to improve significantly next time out. Timberlake's 93 Beyer speed figure at this point in the year is already faster than 4 of the last 5 Kentucky Derby winners at this stage of the year. So he is already a relatively fast horse. I will say this, however, Timberlake and Sierra Leone, neither one, the 1-2 Derby Watch favorites, neither one of them have a significant speed figure advantage over the other 3-year-olds. So far, we've seen some good performances, not great by Derby prospects, but unless someone emerges, and they certainly could with a whole slew of prep races up ahead, it seems increasingly likely to me that the best 3-year-old in the country right now is Nice House, who is currently not eligible to the Kentucky Derby. David, how about your takeaways?
Yeah, and just to build on what you were saying, Brad, no one has run that fast yet. And even though horses like Sierra Leone and Timberlake have achieved what you want to see at this point in their campaign towards the Kentucky Derby, they don't look like the kind of formidable favorites that we've seen in years past. And that's kind of the point that I was getting at with lowering Forever Young's odds as much as I did. Like I said, no one's really making a speed figure for that race, but I think there is a feeling out there that if you did try to nail down a speed figure, it would be faster than we've been seeing from horses like Sierra Leone and Timberlake. So just keeping that in the back of your head as you move forward to a race like the UAE Derby and consider potentially some other new faces that are on this list or potentially not on this list yet could make a splash on this Derby trail down the line.
Yeah, you know that sooner or later in the next few weeks, somebody is going to pop up with a big number and a huge performance. We just haven't seen it yet. Some good performances, but nothing sensational. Timberlake joins Sierra Leone near the top of the Derby Watch list. Common Defense and Just a Touch new to the list. David and I are going to talk about Just a Touch and the Gotham Stakes coming up next in the preview segment. That's a wrap for the review segment. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free. Thanks for watching.